Every couple of years, we have this phenomenon happen called twin films. Prime examples of this include Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down, two bro action movies where people are trying to essentially save the president in the White House. We've had The Prestige and The Illusionist. We've had Friends with Benefits and No Strings Attached, two sex comedies about why friends can't have sex. And then we've had Ants and a Bug Life, which one is a great movie about ants, and then the other one is ants.
Call me crazy, but I have a thing about drinking from the anus of another creature.
And now this phenomenon has sort of presented itself yet again, but this time in TV show format, in which we've had Love and Death and Candy all within about a year of each other. And I thought I'd come on today to give a quick, spoiler-free recommendation on what you should do and which one you should watch based on your preferences. And then after that, for people who already know the story, or people who have seen both, or maybe people who have seen one, kind of break down both of them, bring up their strengths and their weaknesses, and just sort of, paint a picture if you don't have the time to watch both. Or if you just want to have a discussion after you've watched it yourself, I think this is a good video to do that. So before I continue, I'd love if you could subscribe and comment. Let's get into it. So basically, Candy and Love and Death are both telling the story of the Candace Montgomery murder case, or the Candace Montgomery affair. It seems like it's namesake and kind of its place in cultural history is the Candy Montgomery of it all, and that is due to how the actual case goes, but I don't really want to spoil that. So the basic elevator pitch for the story, if you don't know anything going into it, is basically there is an affair between two married people and a murder comes out of that. That's kind of all you need to know going in. I think both shows sort of approach it differently, but they definitely want to have a layer of mystery of how the murder happens, who the murder happens to, who's still alive at the end of the story, at least for the first couple episodes. So I think if you know nothing at all, that's all you need to know. And I think both shows kind of demand some patient viewing at times, but I think Love and Death definitely draws it out at the start. And I think if you watch the first episode, you're sort of going, what's interesting about this? So I think if you have in the back of your head that this affair is sort of going to head into a murder, I think that'll get you through it. Now, in terms of which one I'd recommend if you don't want to spoil a discussion or you don't want to know anything, and because I'll paint a more in-depth image of which one I think you should watch, but if you really want to know nothing, I think Love and Death gives the more full image of both the affair and the murder trial, and really gets into the psyche of these characters. However, I think the presentation, and for 90% of it, the dark tone and the mature angle that Candy takes is my preference. And if you're into sort of those David Fincher movies and like those really dark, gritty crime procedurals, I think there is a lot of merit to watching Candy.
Swinging an axe 41 times. That ain't easy.
However, that comes with the caveat that I think Love and Death gives the way, way better portrayal of the actual affair itself, why these characters would be sort of drawn to it, what was appealing about it, and sort of the naivety they entered the affair into. And I think it juxtaposes really well to how dark the story gets. Whereas with Candy, it's got this really dreadful, suffocating, like painful tone throughout, and it almost feels like an inevitability. So I guess it depends on your preference. Both get adequately dark by the end, but I think Love and Death gives a better overall image, but I think both shows need each other. And my contention, and what I'll get into in sort of the spoiler section of this video, is I actually think you need to watch both. I think you owe it to yourself. If you're going to watch Love and Death for, I think it's 7 hours, 7 or 8 episodes, why not just make it a 13-hour fucking binge and watch Candy as well? And the reason I say that is because there are things that Candy portrays so well that are missing in Love and Death, and there are things in Love and Death that they do so well that Candy's missing, that I think if you want the most just comprehensive, good idea of how this situation happened, and you just want to feel like an expert, watch both, right? It's the difference between an 8-hour show and a 13-hour show. And, you know, I think that time investment pays off really well. I watched it in a very unhinged, bizarre way, but I almost finished both shows going, I think that was ideal. I watched the first 6 or 7 episodes of Love and Death. I had 1 episode to go, and I'd been watching it live at that point, so I had a week of nothing, and then I went, fuck it, I'm just going to binge Candy. And Candy retroactively made a lot of Love and Death better. I think there was, again, spoiler section, but a better portrayal of some things. And then I watched the finale of Love and Death, which centers around the court case, and the court case is so much better handled in Love and Death, but based on everything I knew on both shows, I really got a kick out of that last episode. Like, so yeah, it's a weird way to watch it. I guess I would say, if I had to pick which one you watch first, I would say watch Candy, then watch Love and Death. Yeah, I think watch Candy, then watch Love and Death. That would be my consensus. But I think if you're only going to watch one, watch Love and Death. That is, overall, that's the one I'm going to recommend. But I do feel like you're missing out if you only watch Love and Death and you don't watch Candy. And I know that's such a specific recommendation, but that's just how I feel. I am so glad I watched both instead of one. And I don't regret the time investment at all. So that's my opinion. Now I'm going to sort of justify why that opinion's the case. I've kept it as spoiler-free as I can, and now I'm going to get spoiler-ish. Full spoiler discussion. Tap out here, but subscribe before you go. Now, a lot of these differences come down to personal preference, but I do think there are some things that I would like kind of fight people on which one was better. Now, the first big one here is structure. I think Love and Death has a more conventional structure. It is essentially telling this story from A to B. And I think if you know absolutely nothing as to where this show is going, I do think that's the better experience. I think it draws out the mystery quite well. You're actually not sure who's going to kill who. However, if like most people, you sort of know that this is the infamous story of how a woman who fucked someone's husband killed that woman and got off scot-free. If you know that as the entry point, I think Candy and its structure and how it sort of plays with what you already know going into it is way more captivating. Does that make any sense? Like, I'm saying if you know absolutely nothing, Candy and Death is better. It holds your hand a bit more. It's more conventional in its structure and its unraveling of the mystery. If you know the beats, the Spark Notes version of this case and of this story like I did, Candy's just fucking right to it. You know, Candy knows what's up. And it's playing with before and after and jumping around. And again, if you know where it's going, that's really satisfying to watch. Love and Death and its structure, I think, is going to fit more audiences. I think Candy's structure is going to reward more sort of patient, observant, clinical watchers, if that makes any sense. More of your David Fincher fans. Candy feels like a show that you're going to sort of lock in, turn the lights off, and really pay attention. You don't want to be talking through it. You don't want to be making jokes with your friends. You are locked in. I think Candy and Death, with its more sort of drawn out story, it's more sort of like WandaVision-esque presentation, and also it's really snarky, nasty, dark sense of humor, I think demands more fun jokes and more sort of a drawn out fun. I can picture people watching this together, if that makes sense. I can picture it being sort of a Gen Z millennial sort of hit where like people meet up and watch it together and kind of talk over and like make a drinking game out of it. Whereas Candy is it doesn't have a mean spirit. I think it's been a bit more objective. And you gather that from sort of the cast interviews as well. And it's almost funny how absurd these events are on paper and how the cast kind of tiptoes around placing judgment on Candace Montgomery, but I'll get to that later. All right, so before I go on, I am aware that some dried moisturizer has appeared right here in the video frame as I'm editing. I am sad and disgraced by this, and I would like to formally apologize. This feels like a first date disaster, and I'm really sorry you all have to watch this. I hope it goes away by the end of the video, but I don't remember noticing while filming it, so just try ignore it. So yeah, structure-wise, I personally prefer Candy, but I think for most audiences, Love and Death is the way to go. And that's going to be sort of the contention of what I get at here, is I think Candy has a lot more artistic merit overall. I think it's a more mature, patient, sort of rewarding show if you're like really intellectually engaging with what it's doing. But I think Love and Death is the way easier recommendation. And again, it covers the sort of story of it so comprehensively that it really leaves no room for anything to be misinterpreted, except Betty, which I will get to. So now we're going to talk about characters, acting, portrayals. I think Jessica Biel's Candy and Elizabeth Olsen's Candy are neck and neck. However, I do think that if you watch Candy, you get a sense from the jump, like, I don't think sleeping with this woman, having an affair with this woman is going to go well. She looks like someone that would murder my wife. You get it straight away. You're like, no.
Broke a fingernail there. Oh, couple.
Oh, they're just so brittle. I really try to grow them, but I can't.
And with Candace Montgomery or Candy in Love and Death, I think sort of they portray her ability to sort of seduce this guy and make an affair really appealing and sort of like romanticize this idea of just an escape from mundane suburban housewife life. I think they present that way better. I think if you watch Love and Death, you sort of get why these characters would get entangled in something that becomes so traumatic and dramatic by the end of it.
Would you be interested in having an affair? We can never allow Betty or Pat to get hurt.
Whereas with Candy, you're sort of sitting there like, dude, don't do it. I think Jessica Biel's performance feels a lot more grounded. It feels a lot less satirical and a lot more just like, this is a woman going about her business. I think the way she's presented with sort of the conversations she has with friends about sleeping around and potentially having an affair or sleeping with someone new after leaving a marriage, she definitely feels a bit more calculated and a bit more sort of like indifferent to the repercussions that would happen from this affair. That's sort of the best way I can explain it. She feels sort of like, I'm going to get what I want. I'm a bit bored in my marriage. That's what I'm going to do. And yeah, she does give the whole sales pitch of, oh, we're going to watch out for our partners. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to make sure that like no one gets hurt. But you sort of just feel like she's saying that just to kind of, you know, get Alan Gore along with it. And then, you know, fucking what happens. In Love and Death, however, I did actually feel like Elizabeth Olsen until she got emotionally attached, and then you sort of see an unhinged nature come out. But it did actually feel like she had good intentions with the affair. And I mean, as good intentions can be when engaging in an affair. But like, I don't know, not to sound like a slime ball, but it's like, yeah, the way it was presented in Love and Death, at the very least, you sort of get why someone like Jesse Plemons, who clearly lacks agency and like confidence in himself and just an ability to sort of think things through properly, would engage in that. It's very sort of similar to a lot of the ideas that were explored in something like Gone Girl. But I do think Candy feels a lot more like David Fincher and Gone Girl. Now, onto other characters. Alan Gore. This is a tough one. And I think this is a tough one because they're also incredibly starkly different. I think Alan Gore in Love and Death feels like a fucking bumbling idiot. And I love Jesse Plemons, and I have to assume it's intentional. And Jesse Plemons is like a well-spoken, smart man. Like, you watch him talk, he was incredible in Power of the Dog. And I don't think it's a bad performance here. It's just his character feels like a fucking, like a man-child. Like, to the point where you're wondering if he has an actual like sort of maybe like social issues. Like, I don't know, like Alan Gore in this version of Love and Death feels like he needs to like go out and touch grass, not touch Elizabeth Olsen's ass. He's just, it's like he bumbles his way into affairs with like multiple women, but then you watch him talk and it's just dull and boring. And he is soft, he is kind, he is like gentle. You do get that maybe like Elizabeth Olsen would be like maybe slightly drawn to just the fact that he's sort of emotionally available, but her husband is for the most part like, yeah, he kind of fumbles the bag occasionally with like, oh, I'm watching TV and stuff, but dude pulls his weight when his wife murders another woman. Like he is there for Elizabeth Olsen or Candy Montgomery. And I just, the portrayal that Jesse Plemons has here of just sort of this like bumbling idiot that just happens to get all these women literally like murdering over him, I find almost like, I shouldn't say it, but I find it funny. It's such a weird, quirky take on a character, and it's like you almost hate him more than the other Alan Gore from Candy just because he feels so indifferent, you know? And it's bizarre because there's that whole section where he's getting all his neighbors and like rallying the troops to check on Betty and whether she's okay when she's actually been murdered. And that whole section goes on for ages, and it's like he puts in so much effort, and it's like I'm sitting there thinking, fuck, like maybe I'm a bad partner because like I would, you know, I don't, if I didn't hear from someone for 2 hours, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, whole neighborhood check on her house. He's fucking like crushing it. But then when he finds out that she's dead, he's sort of just like, like, it's bizarre. It's a bizarre portrayal. However, I think the Alan Gore that we get in Candy, one, he's got like, I hate to say it, he's got more sex appeal, all right? You've got Porn Stash from Orange is the New Black. You get why Jessica Biel's Candy is drawn to him like a bit more. He is also quite concerned with Betty's well-being in that scene. As concerned as someone can be after engaging in an affair that kills a woman, but you know, like he actually does seem concerned. And he's interesting because I think he comes off a lot more actively unlikable just by nature of how good looking he is, how sort of typically, I guess, masculine he is, and sort of, he does very much come off the sort of absent husband who feels like he almost has better things to do than tend to his wife's postpartum depression. So I think in terms of how Alan Gore is portrayed and sort of the actual affair is portrayed, I think Candy's one is a much better look at sort of how crushing an affair is on the people involved. And I think it's a much bleaker look, it's a much darker look, it's a much more tragic look. And I feel like Love and Death, up until certain things happen in the back end, I feel like Love and Death is way more sort of like, I guess the Ashley Madison approach of like, life's short, have an affair. I'm
looking for someone other than my wife. Other than my wife. Ashley Madison is right.
And obviously maybe the point there is that, I guess, sort of, it's meant to be naive. It's meant to be like, oh, like these characters didn't think it through and look where it gets them by the end of it. But I feel like Candy, again, depending on what you prefer in sort of your tonality, I do appreciate the fact that there's like this foreboding sense of dread. And it's like the moment that Alan Gore and Candy Montgomery in Candy sleep together, you just feel like the time is ticking away for something bad to happen. Whereas with Love and Death, you're sort of like, oh, where's this going? You're sort of like with the characters in a sense, and their sort of naivety. So yeah, I think both are good. I think I actually struggle to decide which Alan Gore I prefer. With the portrayals of Candy Montgomery, I think that Elizabeth Olsen's is a more well-rounded approach. You get the dark and the light. I think with Jessica Biel's Candy Montgomery, you really only get the dark. And I think the darkness in Jessica Biel's is done a lot better. But I think I prefer Elizabeth Olsen's portrayal because you at least sort of buy how she would have lured I guess, Alan Gore into this affair and made it such an appealing prospect. And you're not sitting there the whole time being like, what an idiot. And also, I think with Elizabeth Olsen's portrayal, you also get why she actually may have got away with it at the end and how the jury would have sort of warmed to her and liked her. With Jessica Biel's character, I'm a bit more like, she does not come across super likable. She comes off as a bit of a nice queen, and I can't picture a jury like really going, oh, this poor woman had like a snap moment. You know, I don't see it. And I think that's a sentiment that has been sort of echoed around people that have enjoyed this show. I think there was a comment on like Watch Mojo's video comparing the like technical differences, where the main comment was like, yeah, when Candy ended, I couldn't believe she got away with it. Whereas with Love and Death, I sort of got it. So that's how I feel about the two portrayals. They're both fantastic. I just think, given what the show gives Elizabeth Olsen, I think there's a more well-rounded, more sort of like drawing version of Candy Montgomery. But in regards to Alan Gore, I actually think it's a lot harder. I think there's this really, really interesting portrayal that Jesse Plemons is doing where he's almost indifferent to the chaos going around him. And I don't think that's bad writing. I don't think that's bad acting. I think it's kind of really interesting to watch sort of the man at the center of someone who's literally been murdered and someone else who's potentially going to jail almost sit there as just this like impartial kind of witness to it all. Like he seems unfazed to a point where you're almost wondering like, yeah, is he emotionally detached? Is he okay? Like, is he always like this? Like, what is his deal? Whereas with the Alan Gore in Candy, he's a lot more conventional in sort of his reactions. There are points where he feels genuinely sort of conniving and cruel towards Betty in terms of what he does tell her, what he doesn't tell her. And yeah, I think that also links to Betty's portrayal. And this is the big thing I sort of need to give Candy. Just one moment. Spicy. Sorry, so with Candy, with the show Candy, I think Betty is so much better. So much better. So much better. It actually hurts Love and Death. That is the one, and that Betty is the main reason I am saying you need to watch both, because Betty is like 4,000% better in Candy to the point where it actually hurts. And it hurts because it's like Love and Death came after. So this team saw what Candy did and just chose not to do it. And it's like, why? So let me just kind of break down what is better. All right. So in Love and Death, I'm sorry, you kind of get, like, the way it's portrayed is you very quickly get why Jesse Plemons' Alan Gore, you know, sort of looks at the idea of an affair and goes, hey, whatever. All right. Like, they don't do a good job. They do a good job of sort of getting at why Jesse Plemons would be seeking something outside of the relationship. But I just think it's such a weak portrayal of postpartum depression in terms of Betty. They do a lot of sort of telling, not showing. They sort of just go, oh, she's sad and she's been a bit depressed and she's been a bit anxious. But it's like, you know, you get it. But given what they give her, when that final confrontation comes between Candy and Betty, you're sort of rooting for Candy to defend herself. You're like, yeah, go away, you annoying idiot. Like, which is bad. It's bad. It's mean. All right. But like, you don't care. You're kind of like, all right, you women hash it out. Up, Candy won. Fuck, that was mean. In Candy, however, there is this like weight and this cruelty to the affair, given what Betty is feeling, given sort of this grim fucking portrait they give of what postpartum looks like, and what a woman that senses that her man is pulling away. Yes, both these stories are playing with very conventional, like, patriarchal values. They're very much dealing with typical suburban dated housewife structures, right? They are. So I apologize for maybe how I'm talking here, but like that's what these shows are dealing with. And I think with Candy, there is so much effort put into showing this like haunting, almost horror movie version of what being an unhappy housewife looks like. And with Betty, just the constant phone ringing, giving her anxiety, the just suffocating noise of a baby crying that clearly she's dissatisfied with. A grim portrait of an existence. And as a result, the affair feels really, really cruel for Alan Gore to be engaging in. It feels mean. It's hard to watch. And the whole time you're like, this is not a good idea. And with Love and Death, they chose a different route where they sort of tried to tap into that a little, but honestly, it just felt like Betty was just kind of like unlikable and a nag and a bit annoying. And it's like, yes, I get she has postpartum. I get she has anxiety. I get she has depression. You've told me that, but you haven't really shown it. And it is such a fumbling the bag moment for Love and Death, because if Love and Death had done as good a job as Candy did in portraying Betty, I would just go Love and Death. Don't even, sure, Candy's a bit darker, but just Love and Death. Just, the differences aren't worth it. But the portrayal of Betty in Candy is so good that I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice not watching both. And that's why I almost think you need to watch Candy first, so you have a sense of what these relationships look like before sort of the Love and Death schmaltzy appealing affair comes into play, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I sound like a fucking idiot, but it is so good. It's sad, it's haunting. It's one of the best sort of portrayals of the like burden and the side effects and just the pain that comes with an affair. And I think it's actually a very good, I mean, I'm a dude, so whatever, but like I think it's a very good sort of female perspective. It feels like Betty's written with a lot of dignity, and I didn't love the ghost choice after Betty passes away, but I think this show seemed a lot more concerned with sort of the conflicting emotions of, okay, Candy's got off and maybe you wanted her to get off given the self-defense nature of the crime, if you buy that. But how does Betty feel in all this? Betty was someone who was emotionally unwell, like she was mentally unwell, and had a severe emotional reaction to being gaslit and lied to by the two people that were closest to her, snapped, and now she's dead in the ground. And I think Candy approaches it with this sort of appropriate kind of empathetic and sort of nihilistic lens that a story like this demands, whereas Love and Death is far more interested in sort of just centering around Candy, ironically, even though the title isn't Candy. It's way more interested in sort of just, by the end of it, telling Candy's story. And I think it's interesting because on paper I thought this was going to be viewed as like the O.J. Simpson murder case, where everyone unanimously sort of goes, what the fuck? He is clearly guilty. How did he get away with this? I thought it was going to be a joke in like the American sort of cultural zeitgeist of like, oh yeah, OJ's innocent, yeah? Like, that's why I thought Candy Montgomery was going to be sort of viewed as. But when you watch Love and Death, it very much presents it as a more nuanced case. As I said, that comment that was talking about like, oh, like, I actually got how she got away with it. And you do get that. But I really respect the choice in Candy to sort of play with like how that sits with you in your gut. And I think, yeah, Love and Death, based off how it sort of ends and wraps up with that final shot of the motel, it more so as a lens of like, oh, look how crazy this got. What a sad thing given just how friendly the affair could have been, which is like a weird choice. And this is also sort of like reflected in some of like Elizabeth Olsen's interviews talking about her portrayal of Love and Death. I'll see if I can find the clip, but there's this really interesting clip where she's talking about a woman who engaged in like a very serious marital affair multiple times and then murdered the chick that she was like cheating with the partner of. And Elizabeth Olsen's kind of like, yeah, like we were just trying to provide empathy and understanding to someone who sort of made, maybe some like questionable choices. It's like, questionable choices, Liz? Questionable choices? Like, yeah. I think there were some questionable choices.
Trying to understand someone who makes choices that seem like choices I wouldn't make.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
I'm trying to figure out what her value system is.
Whereas with Candy, it really does feel interested in sort of just kind of giving you this grim, unbiased look, and you're kind of sitting there with like a pit in your stomach the whole time, given sort of where Betty goes. And yeah, I think the portrayals of Betty, I think it's just so much better in Candy. I also really like the actress. She's in Yellow Jackets and she's awesome in that, but like, I think you also buy more her sort of snap into the Axe confrontation. And again, that's if we're buying that everything is true, and technically in a legal sense it is, because that's what the court decided. But like, if you're buying the actual events that happen with that Axe confrontation, I sort of got Betty's snapping moment way more. I felt like they were setting up this constant sense of dread and anxiety and pressure that was building in her. And she also just felt like one of, I don't want to say she gave me like school shooter vibes, but she did give me like that sort of quiet, reserved, almost like emotionally detached, unhinged vibe by the time that confrontation came around. So now we've sort of talked about the core betrayals. Oh, actually, one more. I forget his name. What's his name? Candy's husband. Was it Pat? Pat Montgomery. All right, so the portrayals of Pat Montgomery. I did like it better in Love and Death. There were some good moments. The big moment, I guess, we're missing from Candy that wasn't in Love and Death in terms of Pat was probably just the moment where he goes out with the axe and like tries to do an axe chop in a wood log 42 times, just like Candace Montgomery did into Betty. And he goes, man, I'm knackered. There's no way a woman could do that. So good. All right, so here's the thing. Pat Montgomery in Love and Death is like 4,000 times better. But here is what you're missing. All right, so the setup here, and my favorite scene, is that Pat Montgomery is worried that his wife has murdered Betty, right? And Betty got murdered with 42 blows from an axe. So he's sitting there up at night going, oh, I need to give myself peace of mind that my wife didn't murder Betty. So he goes, gets an axe from the garage and starts chopping it into like a wood block. And it's this like extended montage where he's absolutely zonked. And then he goes to bed happy because he's like, well, if I couldn't do an axe 42 times, there's no way a woman could. And like goes to sleep and is like, yep, that's all I need. It was no way it was her. So funny. So good. And look, I shouldn't be laughing, but like that's all the proof he needs. He's just like, well, if I couldn't do it, my wife couldn't. And like goes to sleep happy. It's awesome. And we don't get that in Love and Death. Aside from that, Pat Montgomery across the board in Love and Death is better. Across the board. He's more emotionally vulnerable. It's a better performance. You get more nuance in sort of where he's sort of feeling quite detached and concerned about his wife and whether she actually did sort of intentionally kill Betty. But he also is very nurturing, is very caring. And Elizabeth Olsen really feels cruel for cheating on him. Whereas in Candy, you're kind of like, I don't know, I don't think you guys like each other that much, to be honest. Which, look, okay, maybe isn't reason for cheating, but I'm just saying you're kind of like, fucking whatever. Betty, so much better though. So much better. Anyways, I know that was a bit scatterbrained, but that was the kind of comparison points of these characters. And I know I'm being like a bit sassy, like this is obviously a sad case, but you know, it's the tone of the shows is all over the place. Now, speed round, lightning round, differences, what you get, what you don't get. There is a great cameo section from Justin Timberlake. No. Before the speed round, there is one more character, and that is the lawyer. I don't know his name, and I don't want to search it up because I'm busy. So, the lawyer in Love and Death is so good. He comes out of nowhere and he just steals the show. He's so good. He's so good. He's funny. He's cocky. He's controversial. He does like a sexy rude finger when he's held in contempt. So good. He's hilarious. And the court case in Love and Death is so good. He starts having this like intellectual big dick measuring contest with the judge, and the judge fucking hates him. It's so good to watch. It's hilarious, and it comes out of nowhere in a show that's having such a dark sort of run. You just get this like amazing sequence. It's oh my god, such a good choice. Now, the lawyer in Candy is not quite as good, but he's really good. Does that make any sense? Like if I hadn't seen Love and Death, I'd be like, oh, this lawyer's amazing. Because he's really good. He's just not as good as the Love and Death version. There's one thing he does better, which is when he leaves in handcuffs, he like holds him up. It's a good moment. But aside from that, the lawyer, and also I really like the actor. I don't know if I'm the only one that gets this, but do you ever like watch a show and you really like an actor and they're just kind of like a side character and you're like, oh, this is probably the best they're going to get and I really like them. I feel bad for them. I want more for them. I watched this show called Banshee starring the Homelander from The Boys, and there was this random side character that's introduced in the last 2 seasons played by the guy that plays the lawyer in Love and Death, and I was like, fuck, like he's so good and I just want him to have a good career. I really like him, and now he's crushed it in Love and Death and he's got a bunch of other shows and movies coming out. I am so fucking happy. That's on Vicarious Living, but yeah, good on him. Now, watch Banshee, by the way. Brutal show, but awesome. If you can stomach it, it's good. Now, is there anything else? Are there any other characters we need to compare? I don't think so. But what we are going to compare is we're going to do a speed round of what you get in both shows. So, Candy has incredible opening credits. They are so fucking good. Love and Death's opening credits are some of the worst opening credits I've ever seen. The song that plays, I know it's a classic Nina Simone or something song. I hate it. I hate it. I hate the there's like, on the God tier level, there's like the Succession intro and like Simpsons, and then a bit below that, you've got the Sopranos intro, and then all the way down here in the shitter, you've got fucking whatever the fuck Love and Death intros were. Intro's awesome though. Candy's intro feels like they took the beautiful styling of like Mad Men's intro and just like made it this like David Fincher scary. It's so fucking good, and it's like dissecting the housewife trope in a literal sense. So cool. Next in Candy, you get this amazing cameo from Justin Timberlake.
They call me late. Timberlake.
Playing a police officer who is going after Jessica Biel's Candy. Now, they're married in real life, but it's just their beef is so well done. You also get these extended scenes of them trying to like map out how the murder went down, and it's hilarious. They're openly like sexist morons. Like, it's so fun to watch, and it's like really the only sense of like levity you get in Candy. So yeah, really good. Love and Death, I like the fact that you get a really good image of the affair before it goes to shit. In Candy, you don't really get that. They like bang a few times over like a bench or something. She does do the whole I'm making him lunch thing, but you don't feel it. You don't feel it in here. Whereas with Elizabeth Olsen, you're like, yeah, she's an appealing wife. Why is Pat fumbling the bag? But then you meet Pat and he doesn't seem like he is really. Next, what else? There was something else I was going to say. Fuck. Oh, in Candy, there's an amazing scene. And again, it feels like bullying. I brought that up before talking about Betty, but it feels like a cruel joke that her husband and Candy are playing on her. But there's this great scene where they're at Betty's baby shower and Candy is hosting it while banging her husband, and then has like an intellectual face off and just starts fucking digging at Betty. And it's so mean and it's so cruel, and it's why it sort of informs this idea that at the end, like, Candy kind of just saw Betty as like an obstacle. It's weird. I think both shows did a really good job of like Candy sort of reciting this story of where she was and what she was doing. But yeah, I think overall, in terms of the court case, Love and Death's got it. In terms of actually buying how the story goes, and it is a real life story, I think Love and Death pulls it off better. But you are doing yourself a disservice not watching both. So if you've only watched one, watch the other. I strongly recommend them both. I appreciate the different tones. You got to watch both. But if you've only got time for one, Love and Death for sure. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe watch like a Spark Notes of Candy, because yeah, Betty's so much better. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I know this went for like a while. I guess there was a lot to talk about. It's also kind of like a fun topic of discussion in general. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you want more, I'm doing weekly episodes of The Idol. Leave suggestions if there's anything you want me to talk about. I sort of do want to pivot into like YouTube commentary too, but no, I'm enjoying talking about shows. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment. Let me know what you would like me to talk about next. I'm considering doing a video maybe about Lucas Matson from Succession, but I don't know if like the Succession trains died down or not. But yeah, let me know. Thank you so much for watching.